will the Chinese Communist Party be able to reconcile the two Chinas, the Chinas of haves and the China of have-nots, and whether the party will be up to the governance that the people of China clearly deserve.
Yes.
Is there any interest being shown by China in renewable energy sources?
Well, I'll answer that briefly. I mentioned wind. The national target is to have 15% of energy from renewable sources by 2020. They're probably going to make that. Heavy use of hydro and wind. The largest solar industry in the world now, California, which has recently followed Japan, Germany, Italy, and Spain in its efforts to promote the use of solar energy, finds itself mostly using Chinese equipment. Some of these companies are listed in New York on the stock exchange, and the Chinese companies, and they're very vigorous, primarily in the silicon wafer-based solar panels, but also in metallic film, which is another technology, non-silicon based, that is very attractive potentially. So yes, these things are going on. Biogas has always been a major factor. It's being stepped up. And they're very conscious of the need to have an energy menu for the country that includes a heavy reliance on these things. The one thing they haven't done, probably because they don't have an effective farm lobby, is to what do we call it? Stuff? Ethanol. They haven't done that, and my own view is that that's a farm subsidy, not an energy program, but don't quote me on that.
It's playing around the edges of a renewable energy. Their demand for energy total is so great, they can have a very vibrant renewable energy program. It won't have that much of an impact on the supply of the country as a whole. You know, when you produce and consume 2.3 billion tons of coal every year, you're consuming a lot of energy and polluting a lot of oil. I think we're going to watch the Olympics next year in August. We're going to watch and see whether the sky is blue or the sky is gray.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the Chinese government, the federal government in China is doubling its use of the GDP.
Has done over the last 10 years, the central government, yes.
Are they restructuring the government, or are they just putting more money to the same institutions?
No, there is very fundamental change going on. The size of the government relative to the economy, because a market economy requires a regulatory apparatus and structure to guide it. Some provinces in China, Zhejiang, for example, which is south of Shanghai, the government sector, the state-owned enterprise sector of the economy is only 8%, 92% is private. So you've got areas of the country which are actually in some ways more privatized than the American economy. The superhighways I mentioned have been built as toll roads with private finance. They're building 100 airports. These are being built with private finance. So the private sector has become huge, and it is essentially out of control. If you were to apply the ratios that the United States or Japan apply to the government regulation of the private sector economy, then you would say that about a third of GDP ought to be government. If you believe in the Swedish model, it would be almost 60%, and the French are 54%, because that's what TDGism is all about. But for the relatively free market economies, which are corporate-based, the figure seems to be 33 to 40%, something in that range. The Chinese are only halfway there. And that is why they simply do not have the courts, the lawyers, the police, the inspectors, the regulatory agencies to cope with a lot of the issues that this is in many respects very reminiscent of 19th century Robert Baron era in the American economy. Sir?
Would you comment on civilian nuclear power?
Well, Bob, I don't know if you want to do that, but they're building a huge number of nuclear plants, many of them bought from Westinghouse here, which of course is now owned by a Japanese company. But they also have bought from the French and Germans, and now the new generation of Russian equipment is on sale. They will be putting in about 2 new nuclear plants a year for the next 20 years.
They have a plan to build 30 new reactors. But what impact will that have on the electric power supply?
Probably not much.
A couple of percent, probably?
They'll go from 2 to 4% maybe nuclear. If you contrast that, the French are at 60%, I think. Taiwan is probably around 50%. French are higher. Yeah. So this is, in many ways, the Chinese have, for better or ill, followed the American model, which is one which emphasizes economic growth over conservation of energy. That's the polite way of putting it. I mean, gluttony and lust, perhaps. But anyway, the love of the automobile, and we've structured our entire civilization so it can't work without private automobiles. And the Chinese seem to be making some of the same mistakes. Sir?
You don't hear much about competition between India and China. At one time they were antagonistic and were competitors, and there's not much said today. And both countries are growing and industrializing rapidly, introducing automobiles into their society. Won't there be great competition among them for energy resources?
I'll start, and then...
Go ahead.
I was just in India. What struck me most, having been in China I spent 3 years in South India in the 60s, is that there are now 3 times as many Indians as when I lived there, twice as many cows, and about 50 times as many automobiles. But the roads are exactly the same. They have not invested in infrastructure, by contrast with the Chinese. Why that is a subject for lengthy discussion and speculation. But even in Bangalore, which is the center of the IT industry, because of the relatively highly protected and regulated market, I wanted to buy a USB phone, a Skype phone that you plug into your computer. Not available. But this is the center of the IT industry in the world. So you have, India is about where China was 20 years ago in terms of opening up markets. Interestingly, it's the markets, to the extent they have been opened, the Chinese are in there. I turned on, again, computers, I turned on my laptop, and the network I got was Huawei in Bangalore. That is, the Chinese, started by the military, but now independent of the military, fiber optic company, one of the great companies in the world. So there is an increasing cooperation in the economic area. There's cross-investment. Chinese companies investing in Bangalore and Hyderabad in particular in the IT area, but Indian companies investing in hardware in Shanghai and Suzhou and the like. There's a lot of travel back and forth. The economic and cultural relationships are flourishing, but the 2 countries are still divided by an unsettled border. There are military tensions, and there's a great deal of wariness on the Indian side in particular about China and its rise. From final observation is that I think the Indians have done wonderful things in terms of reform over the last decade, but as I indicated, they're way behind the Chinese. And if you look at the size of India as a destination for foreign direct investment, it is 1/10 the size of China. This is a relationship which is in the process of defining itself, and it's likely to remain complex with elements of competition and cooperation.